What if I told you that for over 20 plus years, one company controlled nearly every comic book and piece of merchandise that reached your local comic shop? Most or many of you know exactly who I'm talking about. For those of you that don't, this is going to be the story of how Diamond Comic Distributors became the king of the direct market and how they lost it all. If you were paying attention to the comic industry at all, you saw the warning signs: late shipments, damaged products, lack of innovation, or desire to change. And at the end, publishers jumping ship left and right. What we were witnessing was really the final death rattle of a company that just wasn't adapting fast enough when the industry changed around them. For decades, Diamond was the only game in town. They were the gateway that decided which new comics would reach store shelves and when, which would get feature promotion, and they were the central hub of the direct market's success. That kind of influence doesn't just disappear overnight. In this video, we're going to answer the question of how the heck did Diamond become the sole distributor for comics and a lot of comic merchandise for over 20 plus years. And in our next video, we'll tackle the harder hitting question of how it all went wrong and why Diamond Comics distributors collapsed. However, let's not get ahead of ourselves because Diamond wasn't always an industry giant. In fact, Diamond may not have existed at all if not for the creation of the direct market. The arrival of the direct market changed everything in the world of comic book distribution and sales. In the early days, comic books were sold like magazines through newsstands and spinner racks, distributed by companies that really didn't care and that treated comics as disposable entertainment. Unsold copies could be returned for credit, and publishers were losing money on returns and shipping. But in the 1970s, a man named Phil Suling, a New York school teacher and comic fan, had proposed a revolutionary idea. What if retailers could order comics directly from publishers at a discount and agree to buy them non-returnable? This meant no unsold copies going back to publishers, but retailers got better prices and publishers could print more efficiently. Phil decided to start his own business called Seagate Distributors and put his ideas in practice. This model gave birth to the direct market. It's a system of comic shops ordering straight from distributors, bypassing traditional newsstand distribution. It allowed an increase in exposure for niche titles, better inventory control, and more creative freedom. It also laid the groundwork for specialty comic stores to flourish in the 1980s and for Diamond Comics to eventually rise to power within that system. Now, Diamond's story, well, it begins back in the early 80s with a Baltimore mailman who really loved comics. Steve Geppi was a letter carrier from Baltimore's Little Italy neighborhood, and did I mention he happened to really love comics? As a kid, he was especially fond of DC superheroes and Disney's duck characters. As an adult, he started to build out his own collection. Geppi began selling extra comics from his collection at comic shows. He had a knack for buying old comics, finding interested customers, and selling at a profit. This side hustle led him to open a tiny store called Geppi's Comic World in Baltimore in 1974. Initially, it only sold back issues, no new comics at all. But the store did well enough that Geppi expanded to more locations and started selling new comics. To get these new issues, he worked with direct distributors, particularly Airjacks Enterprises in Maryland. Now, Airjacks was run by Irwin Schuster and his sons Jack and Hal. By 1982, Airjacks was struggling financially, though. They moved to Florida and were going by the new name New Media/Airjacks. Geppi, who had become their biggest customer, knew from industry chatter that they were about to lose their publisher accounts. Before jumping ship to another distributor, though, Geppi was approached by the Schusters about acquiring some of their distribution assets, small warehouses in Massachusetts and Florida. Now, Geppi agreed, partly because the price was right, but also because it'd be easier than switching distributors. On February 1st, 1982, Diamond Comic Distributors officially opened its doors. And if you didn't know, the name Diamond came from the diamond shape that Marvel Comics used to place on the covers of direct market comics at the time. Well, in those early days, Geppi did everything himself, compiling orders, filling them, and putting together the order forms. He was hands-on in a business that would eventually become an empire. As things moved along well into the 80s, the comic shop scene got pretty wild. It was a real gold rush moment. Old distributors were dropping like flies. Geppi saw his shot. Diamond started scooping up talent that would shape the company for decades. He brought in Chuck Parker, who was a CPA, as the controller. This was the same guy who would rise to executive vice president and chief operating officer and would eventually become Diamond's president until the bankruptcy, of course. Larry Swanson joined up and would be the CFO through the good years and the bad. But the real game changer was Nab and Bill Shanes, who wasn't just some random hire. Shanes had co-founded Pacific Comics and Pacific Comic Distributors with his brother Steve and knew the industry inside and out. Bill brought serious comics knowledge as well as strong relations with retailers, creators, and publishers that Diamond desperately needed to grow. Bill would rise to vice president of purchasing, that is, until he left Diamond in 2013. Now, business-wise, Geppi ran a pretty tight ship when it came to what they distribute. This led to several challenges for the fledgling company and indicated they were not always big on taking risks. Some of you, if you were around, might remember that infamous Miracle Man #9 from Eclipse Comics in 1986. This was the issue with a very graphic childbirth scene. Geppi flat out refused to touch it. His exact words were, "I was a father with kids. Here's a girl with her legs spread wide open giving birth. I'm thinking I don't want my kids to find out about the birds and the bees this way." And that pretty much set the tone for Diamond's conservative approach early on. But this would eventually lead to some tensions with indie publishers, many of whom accused Diamond of acting as a moral gatekeeper. Over time, though, the company relaxed its standards somewhat, especially after receiving pressure from creators and the comic book legal defense fund. Well, moving on, by the late 80s, Diamond was growing fast. Well, not just fast, but ridiculously fast. Within just 6 years, they'd muscled their way up to become the second biggest distributor in the direct market, only behind Capital City out of Wisconsin. The distribution map back then looked completely different than today. Capital City had their tentacles nationwide, while Diamond was mostly an East Coast operation. Out west, Bud Plant Incorporated was king, and there were still a number of regional distributors who were left with the scraps. Now, Bud Plant, he and Geppi had known each other for years. They weren't just business acquaintances. There was some actual trust and friendship there. So when Plant decided he wanted out of the distribution game, he went to Geppi and Bill Shanes, figuring they'd give him a square deal and keep things quiet until it was done. However, Diamond didn't just buy Bud Plant at this time. They actually went on to pick up several other regional distributors in the late 80s and early 90s, including Second Genesis, Destiny Distribution, and Comics Unlimited. But it was the 1988 acquisition of Bud Plant Incorporated that changed everything overnight. Diamond became the biggest distributor in the country. The industry went from having a bunch of smaller players to basically a two-horse race between Diamond and Capital City. Now, while Diamond focused on consolidation and scale, its chief rival, Capital City Distribution, was busy innovating. Based in Madison, Wisconsin, and co-founded by Milton Greep, Capital City pushed the entire industry forward with some groundbreaking ideas at the time. They were among the first to offer monthly sales charts and pre-order catalogs. These were tools that gave retailers better visibility into what was selling and helped shape ordering decisions. They also introduced a 30-day returnability policy for late or defective shipments, which was practically unheard of in the non-returnable world of the direct market. Perhaps most importantly, they began developing early computerized and online ordering systems, allowing shops to streamline inventory and make adjustments in real time. These moves set a new standard for transparency and retailer support. So while Diamond was growing rapidly through acquisition, Capital City was winning loyalty by giving shops more data, flexibility, and technological support. By the end of the 80s and early 90s, speculation buying was in full gear. It was absolutely bonkers in the world of comics. Diamond and Capital City were riding high, making money hand over fist. Then 1993 hit. The whole house of cards came tumbling down. The market crashed hard, and everyone felt the pain. Distributors, publishers, retailers, creators, everyone. Here, Marvel was in a particular tight spot, though. They had gone public, and now they had shareholders breathing down their necks, demanding better numbers. So what did Marvel do? They cooked up what has to be, what I believe at least, to be one of the dumbest business moves in comic history. And definitely one that would lead to an industry wide impact on comic distribution. So let me explain. In late 1994, Marvel bought this tiny regional distributor called Heroes World out in New Jersey. Then they dropped the bomb. From now on, Heroes World would be the only distributor selling Marvel comics. What did that mean? Well, Diamond and Capital City instantly lost about 40% of their business overnight. Just gone. Poof. And the retailers, man, they got screwed even worse. Suddenly, they needed a whole new account with Heroes World just to get major sellers like X-Men and Spider-Man, while still going through the regular distributors for everything else. Retailer orders were now split between multiple companies, which meant smaller volume discounts. Their costs went up while their margins shrank, and, well, it was a mess. DC Comics was seeing the writing on the wall. They were thinking, what if these distributors start going under? How do we make sure Batman and Superman still make it to stores? So they decided to lock in their own exclusive distributor deal. And they chose Diamond over Capital City, with DC executive Paul Levitz later saying, it was apples to apples. We felt that Diamond's chances of succeeding was a little bit better. Unfortunately, though, this was a death sentence for Capital City. They lost Marvel, and now DC was gone too. What choice did they have? After their lawsuits failed, Capital City went to Diamond, cap in hand, looking to sell. And Geppi made an offer. They took it, and that was that. The irony? Marvel's big hero world experiment crashed and burned spectacularly. They realized they made a huge mistake and wanted to go back to using an outside distributor. But guess what? By then, Diamond was the last distributor standing. So by 1997, Diamond had secured exclusive deals with all major publishers, Marvel, DC, Image, Dark Horse. They controlled 95 to 98% of all direct market comic distribution in North America. However, this dominance didn't go unnoticed. In 1997, the U.S. Department of Justice launched a 3-year antitrust investigation into Diamond's market power. Officials were concerned about whether Diamond's control stifled competition and harmed retailers. After an exhaustive review, the Department of Justice concluded in November 2000 that while Diamond indeed held a virtual monopoly in comic distribution, they didn't break federal law because broader book distributors remained active competitors. In effect, federal regulators accepted that splitting Diamond's grip could jeopardize the entire market or leave many shops without any distributor at all. Diamond walked away uncharged, and its exclusive status remained untouched. And so this is how, from 1997 to 2020, Diamond was able to operate as a monopoly. 23 years, during which comic book movies went from a small niche to dominating Hollywood. Graphic novels and trade paperbacks overtook monthly comics and sales. You started seeing comics everywhere once again: bookstores, school book fairs, libraries. We saw a significant rise of manga in America and kids' graphic novels that sold millions of copies without ever being monthly comics first. So Diamond didn't just sit still, they expanded strategically. In 2000, they bought Alliance Game Distributors, the biggest tabletop game distributor in the country, which was a smart move since games and comics often share the same retail space. In 2002, they launched Diamond Book Distributors to get graphic novels into bookstores. All these companies operated under the Geppi Family Enterprises umbrella. During the monopoly years, Diamond created several programs and services that benefited the comic industry as well. Probably most importantly to the stability of the comic market were financial support programs that were a genuine lifeline for struggling comic shops. They offer critical credit and loan programs, stepping in when small retailers face cash crunches due to slow months, rising rent, or the fallout from economic downturns such as 2008's Great Recession. Geppi Family Enterprises quietly extended financing to hundreds of stores, some who reportedly owed Diamond up to thousands at a time, helping them restock and stay in business. Beyond financial support, Diamond championed grassroots growth through programs like Free Comic Book Day, which launched on May 4, 2002. Originally suggested by retailer Joe Field, Diamond coordinated with major publishers and delivered over 2 million free comics across more than 2,200 shops during the inaugural event and every year since. It wasn't just about giveaways. Stores hosted signings, themed events, and drew both loyal fans and curious newcomers, making Free Comic Book Day a cultural fixture that would re energize local comic communities. Diamond also supported community engagement through programs aimed at libraries, schools, and educators, partnering with librarians and teachers and promoting graphic literature for young readers. Offering distribution of indie and self-published titles with small print runs was a significant way in which Diamond gave huge support to independent publishers. Without their reach, many of today's top creators might have remained undiscovered. By placing riskier and or creator-owned comics alongside major titles in previews, magazine, and showroom displays, Diamond provided vital visibility and access, planting early seeds for modern alternative comics success. Their investments in Comic Suite, which was a point of sale system, and inventory software launched in 2009. Although it was built on prior earlier systems, it helped comic shop owners manage pull lists, stock, and customer orders, offering real efficiency to mom and pop shops. Combine these efforts, financial lifelines, promotional campaigns, indie support, and shop services help thousands of retailers not just survive, but thrive. For comic shops, Diamond was now it. And this made Diamond indispensable to the comic industry. They had the power, the reach, and the loyalty of every major publisher. However, plenty of retailers shared concerns that Diamond now had zero incentive to improve services or fix problems retailers were experiencing. Why would they? Where else were shops going to go? So behind Diamond's dominance were cracks, and cracks that would soon become major fault lines. So make sure to catch part 2, where we'll explore what happened when the world changed and Diamond didn't. From pandemic shutdowns and abandoned pull lists to damaged shipments and publisher revolts, this monopoly would finally break. So I hope you've enjoyed this video outlining the rise of Diamond Comics to the top of the direct market, and I hope you'll consider hitting that like and subscribe. It really helps out our channel. As always, stay geeky, my friends, stay geeky. Later!